In the fall of 2021, the citizens of Waukesha, Wisconsin gathered to celebrate the approach of Christmas with a city parade. The joy of the event, however, was tragically cut short as a red SUV approached the parade from behind and rammed its way through the crowds, injuring over 60 and leaving at least 6 dead. The man alleged to be responsible was Darrell Brooks Jr., a black nationalist and ardent supporter of Black Lives Matter. A search of his social media accounts revealed an apparent desire to do violence against white people, and a fellow supporter of Black Lives Matter openly wondered if Brooks was bringing about the revolution that black nationalists were waiting for. While we're inundated by the media about the rightful dangers posed by white nationalism, we hear very little about the dangers of other ethnic nationalisms. And after an apparent black nationalist commits mass murder, the silence in the media about just this problem is absolutely deafening. But what is ethnic nationalism, and can it ever be justified? Join me in this video as we review everything you need to know about ethnic nationalism.
Welcome to Religion, Sex, and Politics, your place to talk about the 3 things we're not supposed to talk about. If you haven't already, subscribe and ring the bell. And if you like our content, help out the channel by sharing this video with others.
Ethnic nationalism, which is sometimes also called ethno-nationalism, emphasizes the role of a particular ethnic or racial group within a nation. A nation dominated by ethnic nationalists may pass laws that favor a particular ethnic or racial group, or even pass laws that do harm to members of non-favored ethnic or racial groups. A nation's intermediate institutions, like hospitals and universities, can add their institutional powers to state powers being used to favor one group or punish another. To be clear, ethnic nationalism is currently dominating the cultural landscape of America. And no, the ethnic nationalism in question is clearly not white nationalism. I'm sure that there are plenty of white nationalist individuals in America, but the question isn't so much about the existence of white nationalists as it is about the power currently held by white nationalism itself. Can you name a single institution that operates in the name of white nationalism? A university, a hospital, a library, or even a political body like a state governorship or legislative house? I'm sure most of these institutions have a small population of white nationalists within them, but nowhere can we find a single public institution held in the hands of open white nationalist leaders. No, it's black nationalism that now dominates the United States. Though the movement has its roots with the Black Panthers, a militant black nationalist organization that sought its goals through violence rather than through Martin Luther King's nonviolent civil rights movement, today's black nationalist cause is furthered by the organization Black Lives Matter. Indeed, if we trace the lineage of BLM as it's abbreviated, we find that it finds its roots in the Black Panthers and not with Martin Luther King Jr. A key difference between the two is that the civil rights movement of Martin Luther King was at its core a Christian movement that sought the equality of all because all are called to become the sons of God in Christ. The Black Panthers of the past and the BLM movement of the present are at their core Marxist movements that are opposed to Christianity. For them, the races are not meant to be equal. The races are meant to fight each other for dominance. And this idea isn't just held by black nationalists. White nationalists believe the exact same thing. It's an idea that both white and black nationalists derive from social Darwinism, the same philosophy held by Adolf Hitler and his allies in Imperial Japan. But can ethnic nationalism ever make sense? To answer this question, we first have to understand the difference between a multi-ethnic nation and a mono-ethnic nation. If you live in the United States like me, you've been raised with the story of America's melting pot, where people of all racial and ethnic backgrounds come together to form one American people. Of course, this idea of the American melting pot is rejected by both white nationalists and black nationalists, who reject the idea of a single American people in a colorblind society. And from this, it's easy to see that ethnic nationalism, especially one that has been weaponized against other ethnicities or races, is irreconcilable with a multi-ethnic society. But what about monoethnic societies? Societies where one ethnic group comprises some 85% or more of the population. Countries like China, Hungary, Japan, Poland, and Vietnam. Of course, ethnic nationalism can be dangerous, even in monoethnic nations. Minority ethnic groups like the Tibetans or Uyghurs of China's Tibet and Xinjiang province can still face severe hardships within a monoethnic nation that embraces ethnic nationalism. Even still, I would argue that in the case of China, the harsh policies in Tibet and Xinjiang have very little to do with ethnic nationalism and much more to do with the geostrategic importance of Tibet and Xinjiang as buffer regions between the Han Chinese population core and the nations of India and Central Asia. Tibet plays an additional role as China's key source of water. So as long as people still need water to live, China will do everything it can to control Tibet. The upside of ethnic nationalism within a monoethnic nation is that it can create national solidarity based on the ethnic ties that bind the nation's people together. This can build long-term social capital and help unify a nation during times of hardship. In terms of foreign policy, ethnic nationalism acts to prevent a monoethnic nation from pursuing imperialistic ambitions. A monoethnic nation that sees itself in terms of its ethnicity and wishes only to be a nation of that ethnic group will not seek world domination. The borders of a monoethnic nation, guided by ethnic nationalism, will roughly align with the borders of its dominant ethnic group. And this is why China hasn't sought to conquer Southeast Asian nations like Vietnam, or the nations of Mongolia and the Korean Peninsula. Of course, border disputes may occur in areas where the national boundaries do not align perfectly with the region's ethnicities. The infamous Durand Line, for example, divided the Pashtuns of Pakistan and Afghanistan, which led to many of the problems the region faces today. The communists of the Soviet Union did the same thing by intentionally redrawing the borders both in Central Asia and in Ukraine, so that should the Soviet Union collapse, conflict would ensue between Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan on one hand, and Russia and Ukraine on the other. The situation in Ukraine has become particularly dangerous as the current Ukrainian government takes up ethnic nationalism to press for war against ethnic Russians living in Ukraine. Considering how Eastern Orthodoxy dominates the nation's religious landscape, an emphasis on religious nationalism would have been much more appropriate for Ukraine. Sadly, ethnic nationalism has proven stronger, and so much so that a schism arose within Ukraine between a pro-government Ukrainian church and a Ukrainian church that is under the authority of Moscow's Orthodox Patriarch. The current situation in Ukraine reminds us that, like the United States, ethnic nationalism operating within a multi-ethnic nation can only lead to national self-destruction. One last point about monoethnic nations and ethnic nationalism. These nations care deeply about their ethnic population and are more likely to resist mass immigration, especially if their populations are relatively small and can be diluted by such immigration. This is why Poland is so up in arms against the immigrants that marched on its borders from Belarus in the fall of 2021. In fact, Poland is using the immigration issue to justify doubling its military. And where multi-ethnic nations use immigration to offset declining population, Hungary incentivizes the growth of its ethnic population by offering free homes and reduced taxation to married couples with many children. So to sum this all up, monoethnic nations shaped by ethnic nationalism allows ethnic ties to create social solidarity, especially in times of difficulty. While they may go to war with their neighbors, their foreign policy seeks to maintain national borders to encompass their ethnic population and no more. And while immigration is possible to these nations, their immigration policies are often hostile to mass immigration for fear of diluting their ethnic supermajority. But while ethnic nationalism is potentially a viable option in a monoethnic nation, it's absolutely a non-starter in a multi-ethnic nation like the United States. Although the media and left-wing activists within the government warn us only of white nationalism holds zero institutional power in the United States. Meanwhile, black nationalism has grown like a cancer. You can't even go to an NFL football game without hearing the black national anthem sung. And in the case of Waukesha, it appears to have been used to let the alleged mass murderer and anti-white black nationalist out of jail on a $1,000 bail following a violent offense, only to see him proceed to commit a massacre that killed 6 white people. How many more citizens have to die before we realize that our political and cultural support of black nationalism is endangering our nation? Now let me be very clear about this. White nationalism is evil, and it must be resisted. But black nationalism, while also an evil, currently possesses the far greater threat to America because of its current institutional power at the political and cultural levels. If America wants to take racial justice seriously, and it should, it needs to set aside all forms of ethnic nationalism and return to the Christian civil rights movement of Martin Luther King Jr. In the final analysis, the only nationalisms that can unify America rather than tear it apart are those that are founded on religion and civics. We hope our nation will wake up to this reality before it's too late. Feel free to drop us a comment about today's video. Give us a like and share this video if you enjoyed today's content. It's a great way to support the channel and help inform others. Thanks so much for watching, and see you next time.